Imagine for 1 second that you are standing in the epicenter of a target, aimed at by thousands of nuclear warheads, ready to turn the world into radioactive ash. The date is June 19th, 1978, and you are not in a safe American suburb, but in the heart of the Empire of Evil, on Red Square in Moscow, where the air is so thick with paranoia and grayness that it is hard to breathe. Around you are people with stone faces, plainclothes, KGB agents, whose eyes scan the crowd like X-rays, and the walls of the Kremlin, behind which sit the elders deciding the fate of the planet. In this atmosphere of total control and fear, the appearance of any foreigner is an event. But what is happening now causes reality to tear at the seams. Through the gray, faceless mass of Soviet citizens walks a man who shines like a supernova. This is Muhammad Ali, the loudest, most unpredictable, and freest man of the West, has voluntarily walked into the bear's cage. In Washington, in the Oval Office and the corridors of Langley, panic bordering on hysteria reigns. CIA analysts haven't slept for 2 days because Ali is not a diplomat who can be briefed, nor a spy who can be controlled. He is a loose cannon, a force of nature that might blurt out anything. What if he starts preaching Islam right by the mausoleum? What if he publicly insults the Soviet system and provokes an international scandal that becomes a pretext for war? America holds its breath, expecting a catastrophe, but no one, not in the White House, nor in the Kremlin, could have predicted that the weapon that would neutralize the greatest would be neither ideology, nor threats, nor even money. Ali walks across the cobblestones, smiling his famous $1,000,000 smile, and Soviet people, accustomed to the stern faces of their leaders, look at him as if he were an alien. He hugs pioneers. He jokes with the militia. He behaves as if borders do not exist. But the real drama unfolds not on the street, but behind the closed doors of General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev's office. The meeting is set. Ali expects to see a monster, a dictator, a man whose hands are up to the elbows in the blood of dissidents. He prepares for verbal sparring. He is tense, his fighter's instincts working at their limit, scanning the space for danger. But when the heavy oak doors swing open, that very Santa Barbara effect occurs, knocking the ground from beneath his feet. Sitting before Ali is not a monster. Before him sits a frail, sick old man with kind eyes and heavy shortness of breath, who struggles to rise from his desk to greet his guest. Brezhnev, this architect of stagnation, knows something the American intelligence agencies do not. Ali cannot be defeated by force. He can only be defeated by flattery. The General Secretary does not talk about missiles. He does not talk about capitalism. He talks about peace, about friendship, of how much the Soviet people love the champion. And at that moment, when Ali's vigilance is lulled by the soft voice of the interpreter, Brezhnev makes a move that changes the course of the ideological war. He doesn't pull out a medal. He doesn't sign a decree. Slowly, with a trembling hand, he takes an object from the table that looks laughably out of place in this office of power. This is our dagger, an ordinary bar of Soviet chocolate wrapped in foil. Ask yourself honestly, how would you react if the leader of an enemy superpower, a man your country considers the devil, suddenly treated you to a sweet as if you were his favorite grandson? It is a total break of the pattern. It is a psychological hack. Ali looks at the chocolate, then at Brezhnev. In his head, stereotypes crumble. Do villains give chocolate? He thinks. Ali takes the bar. He unwraps the foil. The sound of rustling paper in the silence of the office sounds louder than a bomb blast. He breaks off a piece and puts it in his mouth. The taste of cocoa and sugar spreads across his tongue, and along with it, the sweet poison of propaganda enters Ali's blood. In this second, the greatest boxer, who could dodge any punch in the ring, misses a blow straight to the heart. He smiles. He hugs Brezhnev so tightly that the guards flinch, reaching for their weapons. "You're not such a bad guy," Ali exclaims. And in that moment, as the chocolate melts in his mouth, America loses the battle for the soul of its hero without even firing a shot. Ali no longer sees the Gulag. He doesn't see the KGB. He doesn't see the Iron Curtain. He sees only a kind grandfather and delicious chocolate. The trap has snapped shut, and it turned out to be sweeter than anyone could have imagined. To understand the scale of the hallucination into which Muhammad Ali was plunged, we need to transport ourselves to the next morning, to the very hour when the gray Moscow dawn was just beginning to lick the red stars on the Kremlin towers. Ali, faithful to his regimen even in enemy territory, decided to go for a jog, and this decision should have been a nightmare for any security service, but the KGB turned it into their greatest triumph. Imagine this surreal scene: the boxing legend running through the streets of Moscow in heavy army boots and a tracksuit, his breath coming out in clouds of steam in the cold air, while around him unfolds a production whose budget exceeded the annual income of a small town. Do you think he was running through the real Moscow? You are deeply mistaken. He was running inside a giant, living set, built specifically for one spectator, and this set was so flawless that Ali didn't even notice the seams. The night before, while the champion slept in his suite at the Metropole Hotel, a quiet but ruthless special operation unfolded on the streets along his route. This was not just a cleanup. It was a sterilization of reality. All the homeless, all the drunks, everyone who even remotely resembled a dissident or simply looked miserable, were moved beyond the 101st kilometer like trash. The asphalt was washed with soap. Shop windows, usually empty and dusty, were filled with deficit goods that an average Soviet citizen only saw in the movies. Ali ran and looked around, trying to find confirmation of American propaganda, which promised him he would see poverty, fear, and oppression. But what did he see? He saw perfectly clean sidewalks. He saw smiling people who waved at him. Ask yourself, could you have suspected something was wrong if you saw paradise where you expected to see hell? Ali was naive, but he was not blind. However, his vision was distorted by that same chocolate effect from the reception with Brezhnev. He looked at these random passers-by who greeted him so sincerely and did not guess that every second one of them was a plainclothes officer whose task was not just to protect, but to create an atmosphere of universal happiness. This was the conveyor of lies principle. Every step Ali took confirmed his new belief that the Soviet Union was not a prison of nations, but a utopia that had been hidden from him. He looked for racism and found none, because in this sterile version of Moscow, everyone was equal in their rehearsed delight. He looked for crime and saw only order. And here, that very Santa Barbara effect kicks in, flipping the consciousness of the viewer and the hero himself. Ali began to compare this fake Moscow with the real New York or Chicago, and this comparison did not favor America. In the USA, he was a black man who had to look over his shoulder in dark alleys. Here, he felt like a deity descended from heaven. I have never felt so safe, he thought as he ran past the mausoleum, and this thought became his sentence. He did not understand that this safety was artificial, like air in a spacesuit, and that it was provided by the barrels of machine guns hidden behind the scenes of this theater. The KGB played on his vanity like a piano. They knew that Ali, who had fought his whole life for recognition in his homeland, would melt from the absolute unconditional adoration here. Returning to the hotel, sweaty, tired, but drunk on what he had seen, Ali gave an interview that made American diplomats clutch their hearts. He didn't just praise the jog. He declared with burning eyes, "I didn't see a single prostitute. I didn't see a single beggar. I didn't see a single gun. This is the most peaceful country in the world." Do you hear the irony? The greatest fighter for truth became the mouthpiece for the biggest lie of the 20th century, because he mistook the absence of freedom for the presence of order. He didn't see prostitutes not because they didn't exist, but because they had been arrested preventatively. He didn't see beggars because the system hid them in basements. But for Ali, who judged the world by how the world treated him personally, this Potemkin village became reality. He believed he had found the promised land, where a man is judged not by the color of his skin but by his deeds, not realizing that he had become the main trophy in the Cold War, a useful idiot who voluntarily put on blinkers woven from flattery and Soviet hospitality. And while he wiped the sweat from his face with that very towel, Washington realized they had lost their hero, because the KGB had found a key to him that was simpler than any cipher. They just showed him a world where he was the sole and infallible center of the universe. Here is the moment of truth for which this entire grand special operation was staged. The moment when the cold steel of political confrontation was supposed to clash with the hot blood of the champion. But instead of an explosion, a chemical reaction of a completely different sort occurred. Ali stood before the massive doors of the office in the Kremlin, and his heart, accustomed to the rhythm of boxing matches, beat with an anxious frequency because he was preparing to meet not an opponent in gloves, but a man whom the American press painted as the Antichrist in the flesh. You probably think Ali was afraid? No. He was wound up. He was electrified. He rehearsed tough questions in his head about freedom of speech and human rights, ready to challenge the empire of evil right in its lair. But when the heavy wings silently opened, letting him into the holy of holies of Soviet power, reality performed a somersault that made Ali's head spin. Instead of a cruel dictator in a military tunic, instead of a monster with red eyes, he saw a frail, heavy old man with bushy eyebrows who, with visible effort, grunting and leaning on the desk, tried to rise from his chair to greet his guest. This was Leonid Brezhnev, the man holding his finger on the nuclear button. But in this minute, he looked like a kind grandfather who had forgotten where he left his glasses. That Santa Barbara effect kicked in, breaking all expectations. Ali, set for confrontation, was instantly disarmed by this infirmity. How can you attack someone who looks as if they are about to crumble? Brezhnev mumbled something. His speech was slurred and heavy, but the interpreter, that master of smoothing corners, turned those sounds into honey. We are glad to see you, great champion. We are peaceful people, and we do not want war. A visual silence hung in the office, thick and viscous as molasses. Journalists admitted for the protocol filming froze, expecting Ali to say something sharp, to destroy this performance with his signature audacity. But Ali remained silent. He looked at Brezhnev and saw in him not the enemy of America, but a tired man who wanted peace. And in that very second, when the champion's vigilance dropped to zero, Brezhnev landed his knockout blow, which required no physical strength. He slowly reached out to the table and took an object that looked absurd in this office, where the fates of the world were decided. It was our dagger, a simple bar of Soviet chocolate wrapped in rustling foil. Brezhnev didn't present a medal. He didn't give a Matryoshka doll. He handed Ali a chocolate bar, as one treats a child who has behaved well while visiting. Ask yourself, what happens in a person's subconscious when the main villain of the planet makes such an intimate, such a human gesture? Ali took the chocolate. His large hands, accustomed to crushing jaws, carefully unwrapped the wrapper. The sound of tearing foil in the silence of the office seemed deafening. He broke off a piece, put it in his mouth, and the moment the sweet taste spread across his tongue, Muhammad Ali's ideological armor finally melted away. This was not just food, it was a communion with a new faith. He chewed, smiled, and in his eyes was a childlike wonder. Do bad guys give chocolate? Can the devil be this sweet? The KGB had calculated everything brilliantly. They bought the loyalty of the world's most expensive athlete for the price of a bar of cocoa beans. Ali stepped forward, breaking all imaginable security protocols, and gathered the General Secretary of the CPSU Central Committee into his bear hug. The guards flinched, but did not dare to intervene. Ali pressed this old, sick man to him, and Brezhnev, who could barely breathe, broke into a satisfied smile. "You're not such a bad guy," Ali thundered, and his voice, amplified by the echo of the high ceilings, became a sentence for American diplomacy. "You're as sweet as this chocolate." In that second, Ali ceased to be an American. He ceased to be a critic. He became a friend of the Soviet Union. He didn't understand that this chocolate was poisoned with lies, that behind these walls, people sat in camps for reading the wrong books, and that this kind grandfather was signing orders to send in tanks. Ali allowed his ego and his emotions to blind him. He walked out of that office with a chocolate bar in his hand and the total confidence that he had just prevented World War III with his charm, not realizing that in reality, he had just become the most valuable asset in a propaganda war he didn't even notice. When the aircraft's landing gear touched the runway at JFK Airport in New York, returning Muhammad Ali from the socialist looking glass to capitalist reality, the American press was already sharpening its knives, preparing for the most sensational press conference of the decade. Reporters from the New York Times, Washington Post, and dozens of other publications gathered in the waiting hall resembled a school of hungry sharks scenting blood. They were certain they knew what the champion would say. They expected stories of gray people, of empty shelves, of fear in the eyes of passers-by. They expected Ali, this symbol of freedom, to confirm their worst fears about the empire of evil, and tell how he was suffocating in the grip of totalitarianism. The script was written in advance. The great American returns home and kisses the ground, thanking God for democracy. But when Ali stepped to the microphones, radiant, rested, and overflowing with energy, something happened that made the most cynical journalists drop their notepads. Instead of playing by the rules of the Cold War, Ali dropped a nuclear bomb on the U.S. information field, the power of which exceeded any political scandal of that time. He began to speak, and every word was a slap in the face of the American way of life. Do you expect to hear criticism? Do you expect nuance? No. Ali spoke with the fervor of a new convert who had just returned from paradise. "I didn't see a single prostitute there," his voice thundered, drowning out the noise of camera shutters. "I didn't see a single homeless person. I didn't see weapons. There is 100 times more freedom in the Soviet Union than in America." The room plunged into that visual silence where the brain refuses to believe its ears. People looked at each other, searching for signs that Ali was joking, that this was another one of his performances, but there was no irony in his eyes. There burned that same fire of sincere, unshakable faith that had been lit in Brezhnev's office after a piece of chocolate. The Santa Barbara effect kicked in, flipping reality upside down. The national hero of the USA, the man who refused to fight for his country, was now publicly, before the whole world, defending the main enemy of that country, using arguments written in KGB handbooks. He continued to speak, and every phrase was a punch to the gut. He talked about how safe he felt on his morning jogs, not suspecting he was running along a sanitized perimeter. He admired the absence of racism, not understanding that in a closed society where foreigners are a rarity, racism simply hadn't had the chance to become a systemic problem in the form he knew it at home. "There, people of different races live in harmony," he shouted, and journalists who knew about the deportations of nations and anti-Semitism in the USSR listened to this with horror, realizing that the greatest hadn't just been deceived, he had been reprogrammed. That very chocolate bar, our dagger, dissolved in his system, was now acting like a reverse truth serum. Ali was saying what he felt, but his feelings were the result of brilliant manipulation. He compared the sterile, showcase Moscow with the dirty, dangerous streets of the South Bronx. And in this comparison, the dictatorship was winning over democracy by a landslide. It was a moment of intellectual orgasm for the Soviet handlers, and a moment of national shame for America. Ali, without knowing it, became the perfect useful idiot, a term cynical intelligence services use to describe celebrities whose sincerity and naivety are used blindly to legitimize a regime. He thought he was breaking stereotypes, that he was building bridges between nations, but in reality, he was building a wall behind which the Kremlin could hide its crimes. His words about the peace-loving Brezhnev were broadcast on all channels, and millions of Americans who idolized Ali felt betrayed. How could he not notice the prison? How could he not see the fear? The answer was frighteningly simple. He didn't see it because he looked at the world through the mirror of his own ego, which reflected only the crowd's love for his persona. Ali finished the press conference, certain of his righteousness, feeling like a messiah who had brought good news. He didn't notice how the attitude toward him was changing in the eyes of the intellectual elite, how yesterday's fans were turning away, seeing him not as a sage, but as a puppet. He won the battle for attention, but lost the battle for truth, allowing his name to become a brand that labeled Soviet lies. And as he rode home in his limousine, remembering Brezhnev's warm embrace, he didn't even suspect that his reputation as a freedom fighter had just suffered a breach that could no longer be patched, because history does not forgive those who mistake the hospitality of a jailer for the freedom of the prisoners. Today, when we blow the dust off the archival folders of 1978 and look at that very photograph where Muhammad Ali, shining like a polished copper pot, hugs the frail Leonid Brezhnev, we are seized by a strange, dual feeling, similar to shame for a relative who committed a folly out of great love. This image was supposed to become a symbol of peace, proof that humanity is stronger than nuclear warheads, but instead it turned into physical evidence in the case of the most successful recruitment of the Cold War. You probably think history has put everything in its place, calling Ali a naive tourist and Brezhnev a cunning puppeteer. That is a convenient, safe version for textbooks, but if you allow yourself to look deeper behind the facade of the official chronicle, you will see a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions, where the main character commits a fatal error not out of vice, but out of an excess of virtue. That very chocolate bar, our dagger, which we introduced in the first act, by the finale of this story acquires a sinister, almost biblical meaning. It was not just a dessert, it was the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But Ali, biting into it, learned not the truth, but a sweet, sticky lie. He returned to America certain that he had prevented a war, that his smile had melted the ice in the relations of the superpowers, but in reality, he only strengthened the walls of the prison in which millions of Soviet people lived. His words about freedom in the USSR became a slap in the face for dissidents rotting in camps, for refuseniks dreaming of emigration, for all those who prayed to America as a beacon of hope, but received a stab in the back from its main symbol. Ask yourself, does sincerity make a delusion any less destructive? Ali was not a traitor in the classical sense. He didn't sell secrets. He didn't work for the KGB for money. He sold his reputation for an emotion, for a sense of his own significance, for the illusion that love can defeat tanks. And here, the final, most powerful Santa Barbara effect kicks in, making your brain explode from cognitive dissonance. Perhaps in this mad, cynical world of 1978, Ali was the only normal person among the insane. Politicians in Washington and Moscow were drawing maps of nuclear strikes, ready to burn the planet for the sake of ambition, while a boxer with a damaged brain tried to hug the enemy because he believed that all men are brothers. Who in this situation looks like the bigger monster? Brezhnev, who used Ali, or the Western critics who crucified Ali for his attempt to establish a dialogue, however clumsy? We are used to judging people by the results of their actions, and the result of Ali's visit was catastrophic for truth, but salvific for hope. He showed that the Iron Curtain is permeable if you come not with weapons, but with an open heart, even if that heart is later broken on the rocks of realpolitik. But the price he paid for this lesson turned out to be prohibitively high. The label of useful idiot stuck to him permanently, becoming a dark spot on his shining armor, a spot that even his subsequent humanitarian missions could not wash away. And now, Standing on the ruins of this historical collision, I want to ask you a question that will haunt you tonight. Look at Ali in Moscow, not as a politician, but as a man. Does a hero have the right to be stupid? Does an icon have the right to be blind? We demand perfection from our idols. We want them to be wise as Solomon and brave as lions, but Ali showed us that one can be the greatest in the ring and an absolute child in the office of a dictator. Whose side are you on in this final round of the battle for legacy? The side of cynical truth, which states that Ali betrayed the ideals of freedom by becoming a puppet of tyranny to satisfy his ego? Or the side of holy naivety, which claims that his impulse was pure and that his faith in people, however mistaken, is worth more than all the political foresight in the world? Who was he in that summer of 1978? A traitor bought for a piece of chocolate? Or an angel who descended into hell and didn't notice the fire because he himself was the light? Write your opinion in the comments, idiot or peacemaker. I will be waiting for your verdict, because in it lies the answer to the question of what is more important for history, the facts that we know or the legends we want to believe in.